So I want to get started this morning with sharing a story with you. There was a poor old farmer who lived with one horse and his teenage son. And a bunch of neighbors came over one day because the horse ran away. And the neighbors were just heartsick for him and said, "Oh, this is awful." And the farmer said, "Maybe, who knows? It could be good or bad." A few days later, the horse came back with 2 wild horses, and the neighbors came running over and yelling and shouting, "This is amazing, you have 3 horses now." And the old farmer said, "Maybe, I don't know, could be good or bad." The neighbors left, probably now thinking the farmer is a little wacky. And a few days later, the man's son was riding one of the wild horses, and he fell off and he broke his leg. And back come running the neighbors. "Oh no, this is awful. What to do? He won't be able to work the fields. This is a horrible situation." And the old farmer said, "Maybe, I don't know. Could be good or bad." A few days later, the army came around, gathering up all the young men in the village. And they couldn't take the son because he had broken his leg. This, my friends, is a story describing equanimity. Rabbi Shapiro defines equanimity as the capacity to embrace what is as it is without getting bowled over. Ernest Holmes, the founder of Science of Mind, would have called that poise. Our ability to be eyes in the storm. Our ability to hold and look right in the face of what is happening and just sitting and resting in faith. Faith that I don't know what it might mean. I'm not going to judge it, good or bad. I am going to be with it in this place of steadfastness. I don't even need to make meaning out of these circumstances I find myself in. This is poise, is equanimity. It's because when we get wrapped up in judging circumstances, judging behavior, we find ourselves very far away from being able to access grace, being able to access the wisdom that lives within. Rabbi Shapiro, in the book we're studying right now, The Sacred Art of Practicing Loving Kindness, says, equanimity purifies loving kindness. That ability to be a place of poise, to be the eye of the storm, actually makes loving kindness possible. Because it gives us distance from our freakouts. It gives us the distance from our judgments, from our hatreds, from our opinions, from our prejudices, from our bias, and allows pure loving kindness to actually occur. It allows loving kindness and compassion and right action to occur. Grace is not something we create or we earn. Grace is our nature. Grace is God itself moving in me, through me, in you, as you, through you. We just have to welcome it. We just have to connect with it. And living with grace, living in grace, and allowing grace to flow in our lives requires the practice of equanimity. It requires the letting go of what we think should be, the letting go of busying ourselves to create what we think should be. It is the allowing what is to be. and then allowing the wisdom that lives in us to move us in right action. Rabbi Shapiro also says, knowing from within and living in harmony with that knowing is living gracefully. And I don't know if it is possible to know from within, let alone live in harmony with that knowing, if we're caught up in judgment, in hatred, in divisiveness and separation, if we are spun up in freaking out with all that is going on, if we are caught up in fear and anxiety, we can't access that inner knowing. We can't begin to live from that knowing, which is what brings the world we want to be living in into being through us, through grace, through the space that equanimity creates, so that we can respond from that harmonious knowing. Rabbi Shapiro also went on to say, equanimity is the capacity to embrace, right? Grace is the harmony of living from within. And Ernest Holmes says, the only guarantee of our divinity is in its expression through our humanity. When we are the presence of poise, when we are the presence of grace, when we are practicing equanimity, Spirit moves freely through us. The divinity that we are becomes our experience. The divinity that we are guides our steps, guides our words, guides our choices. But how do we do that? How do we access that inner wisdom? How do we open ourselves to the spaciousness of equanimity? Well, it's hard. It's hard work. Putting aside judgment, learning to pause before we react, refusing to participate in hatred. And here's the thing about hatred. Many of us as spiritual people, folks who are deeply committed to knowing God and knowing our oneness and feeling our unity with one another, we practice hatred all the time. And we do it by putting ourselves and in our language in the world of us and them, like these candles in our lighting. We practice divisiveness. As soon as we let those words come out of our mouths, that is a form of hatred. That is a form of separation, which is the furthest thing from truth there could be. The furthest thing from love and action there could be. And it is hard not to fall into us and them. It is hard not to see ourselves as so different from someone else. It is hard not to freak out, especially in this moment in history. Especially when we are experiencing together the most profound unknown and uncertainty that I believe we have ever faced. Which means it is critical that we learn how to access the spaciousness of equanimity. It is critical that we learn how to tap in to the knowing that lives in each one of us, so that we can live gracefully so that we can be at choice for how we respond, for how we choose, for how we change. The vision of the Albuquerque Center for Spiritual Living is we live one in purpose, one in spirit, transforming the world. And the mission, the way we intend to achieve that, is to transform our own lives and be a transformation in our communities. To be the love in action that each of us is called to be. We have to identify and discern and be willing to transform. But the only way we can identify what actually needs to be transformed in ourselves, and I can hear you right now in my head, I can hear you through the camera, literally. I can hear you saying, we're whole, perfect, and complete. We don't need to change. I don't need to transform. I'm a child of God. Really? That is absolutely true. You are whole, perfect, and complete. But are you acting like it? You are a child of God. But do you feel that truth? If you can't answer yes to both of those questions, then you have been invited to transformation. You have been invited to change. And I believe our entire globe has been invited to transformation and change. And it is up to each of us to say yes to that individual invitation and to that collective invitation. And we can't do it if we do not know how to access the wisdom, the God voice, the knowing that we know in the center of our being. Because we must rebel against the untruths in the choices and the activities that have led us to this moment. We must rebel against the own ridiculousness in our own heads and say, no, I am not worthless. No, I am not stupid or too fat or poor that I am unable to be God and love in action. We must rebel against all of the falsehoods that are in the way of our wholeness, of our perfection, of our absolute divine nature. I want to share a bit of a reading from Lady Julian of Norwich, who was a 14th century mystic. And she wrote Revelations of Divine Love, which is the earliest surviving book in the English language written by a woman. And in it she says, "This beloved soul was precisely knitted to God in its making, by a knot so subtle and so mighty that it is one with God. It is one in God. In this oneing, it is made endlessly holy." I love that. She wrote that in the 14th century. Long before those of us who think we discovered this great truth of knowing we are one with all that is holy, and we are holy. Julian was writing it down. And I love this idea of oneing. Because that is what, when we allow the spaciousness of equanimity and we allow grace to take hold in our lives, we have the experience of oneness. I believe practicing grace and equanimity is the practice of oneing. It is what allows us to know so deeply in our own being and our felt fleshy experience that I am holy, that you are holy and sacred. And we talked recently about we only care for the things we love and find sacred. And so for the love of all things holy, I want you to say yes to finding yourself sacred and holy. Because when you find yourself sacred and holy, and I find myself sacred and holy, we begin to find each other sacred and holy. We begin to access the truth that is within us so that we can live gracefully, so that we can honor the holy and the sacred in one another, so that we can refuse hatred and separation and divisiveness, so that we can refuse to judge each other based on what we think should be so that we can let go of the crap and the crud that has been in the way for so long and be the truth of who we are, individually and collectively. I listened to a podcast recently with Rev. Angel Kyoto Williams, who is one of 2 black female Zen Buddhist ministers ever. And she was talking about the hyper-individualized justice and the hyper-individualized obsession we have in our society, which is what allows us to get into the false ideology, the false thinking, the false belief of us and them. I don't like how you are doing that thing or saying that thing. I don't like what they are doing. I hate what they are doing. Except they isn't sitting in front of you in relationship with you. You cannot hate without a relationship. And so what you might hate, Rev. Angel went on to say in this podcast, is I hate that I can't do anything about those injustices. I hate that I feel out of control and I don't know what's going to happen next. I hate how scared I am. I hate my absolute lack of understanding about their choices. But the truth is when I sit down with anyone, whether I include them as a beloved or whether they are complete strangers to me or whether they are people who sit on the entire other side of an issue, when I sit down with someone and allow them to be in relationship with me, there is no hate. There might be sadness. There might even be confusion. There might even be frustration. But there is not hate. So we need to begin to learn how, rather than look at the individual or the individuals, we must look up the river. There's this great metaphor about there's a baby who's floating in a river, and we've got to dive in and get that baby out of the river, right? We've got to directly help and get that baby out of danger. But we can't stop there. We got to go back up the river and find out how the frick did the baby get in the river. We have to look in our culture, in our society, not at the people. We have to look at the beliefs and the systems and the institutions that made it possible for someone to throw a baby in a river. We must step back into that spaciousness of equanimity and begin to look at what has created the kind of society that allows for the level of violence and poverty and disconnectedness that occurs. And the one way I know for sure that you and I can access this spaciousness, can access that inner knowing, is through the practice of the Jewish tradition of Sabbath. In the practice of Sabbath, there is in all of these laws, and Rabbi Shapiro says lore about how to do that. And so we as non-Jewish people are not going to dive into all of the laws and lore around a traditional Sabbath practice, but we can lean on this practice. We can draw on this practice and get the gifts of rest, of spaciousness, of inner connectedness and relationship and felt experience of our divine nature. Rabbi Shapiro says, making time for the Sabbath is an act of countercultural rebellion. You are saying no to the consumerist culture. You are saying no to the very idea that you have to earn a living. Earn a living. And yes, to your own intrinsic worth. I just want to hang there for a moment. I've had conversations this last week, several conversations, about how tired people are feeling and about how overwhelmed some of us are feeling and how heartbroken and scared some of us are feeling. And yet, I'm also having conversations with folks in our community, with some of you, that you are struggling with giving yourself permission to slow down, to pause. You're struggling giving yourself permission to actually accept the invitation of this time and live differently than you lived 2 months ago. To take the nap that your body is begging you for. To say no to the 42 tasks that you normally do on the weekend. This time has been gifted to us so that we can go deeper into relationships with our own nature and what actually matters to us. What actually matters to you? What have you discovered in the last couple of months that has risen to the surface as deeply valuable and important? Put it in the comment feed. I would love to know. Because what I have discovered in this time, in my own absolute shift in the way of being, is I had been telling a story to myself that I was really good at boundaries and saying no. I was getting really good at minding my schedule. And you know what I've discovered this last couple months? BS. Not true. I may have been better than I was before, but I hadn't really slowed down. I hadn't really learned how to say yes to what was truly mine and no to what wasn't. The one thing that I have been doing for quite a while now, for years, is practicing Sabbath, and thank the holy ones, because it is what has allowed me to even discover in these last couple of months that I might be BSing about some things. And that this invitation that Spirit has given me in this time is to get even clearer, to rebel even more, to be in the countercultural practice of spiritual being, of spiritual living. And so I have been astounded, really, in my life in the last couple of months of the amount of rest I actually need. The amount of downtime I really need. And I am now instituting 2 days of Sabbath a week. And in our culture of busy and productivity and earning our lives, sit with that for a minute. Is that the dumbest shiznit you have ever heard? That you have to earn your life? I beg to differ. You are a child of God. There is no earning. You are whole, perfect, and complete as is. There is no earning that either. And so the practice of Sabbath, the practice of completely letting go of everything we think should be, the complete, absolute nothingness in our plans, and to light a candle acknowledging, I probably walked into this moment feeling divided and separate and judgy, but I'm going to light these candles today to remind myself that there is one light. There's always only been one light. And I'm going to spend the entire day doing nothing but allowing the light that I am to move and have its being as a divine creature. One of the instructions Rabbi Shapiro gives in the Sabbath practice is to make a to-do list for Sabbath. And there should be one word on it: nothing. 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 Because when we allow for that kind of spaciousness, we allow the truth to rise and guide us. It's one of my favorite things I do every week, is to wake up and know I don't have to do anything. I just get to be. And I want that for you. I want you to have that experience of knowing, as Rabbi Rami says, your intrinsic worth. And it does not have to be earned. It just is. He goes on to say that Sabbath is more than a day of rest. It is a day of grace. It is a day devoted to celebrating what is, rather than frantically trying to create what might be. And one of the ways that I know when I am out of balance in my life, well, there's many ways, right? I get cranky. I get intolerant. I get easily frustrated. I decide that towel should have been over there and not over there. And I know when that's happening that I have allowed my being and my doing to get out of balance. My doing has suddenly taken center stage, and my beingness has fallen to the wayside. And that is a call for Sabbath. That is a call for pause. That is a call for nothingness, so that I can remember that it is my being that is priceless. It is not my doing. And when I am connected to that place of being, when I am living harmoniously with that inner knowing, my doing is just a natural outpouring of my being. Rabbi Rami goes on to say, the Sabbath is the end of craving. The Sabbath is tossing the bucket of narrow mind into the sea of spacious mind and allowing your original divine nature to put an end to fear, anxiety, and craving. We've been trained to crave more. We have been raised in a society where productivity and consumption is the norm. And spiritual practice, spiritual living, is a rebellious choice because it says no to consumption and craving what I don't have, and oh my God, and they have that and I don't have it. No. Everything you've ever needed is who you are. And when each of us moves more fully into that experience, we recognize that we belong to each other in that truth. And that I have everything I need, and I have so much in my life, I have enough to share. I have so much in my beingness, I have enough love to give freely, gracefully. When I say no to earning my worthiness, when I say yes to prioritizing 2 days a week my own beingness, this is the beginning of a world that works for everyone. This is the beginning of absolute removal, liberation, and freedom from separation and hatred. This is the beginning of the world we want to be living in. So I'm asking you, join me in this prayer and declare your sacred yes. Your sacred yes to who and what you are as divine, grace-filled, spacious-minded, spiritual humans. Join me in prayer. There is only one light, one love, one truth, and it is what we are made of. We have each been knotted in that divine knot with Spirit, and we are made holy as a result. There is no other possibility. The holiness and sacredness of each one of us is also the truth of our collective humanity and world. Every sentient being is true in this one. And so I won with you, and you won with me, and we won in this collective wisdom that moves us forward, dismantling systems and structures and beliefs and norms that no longer serve, bringing forward the world that is filled with grace, the world where everyone has all that they need, the world where you and I can sit across from each other in disagreement and not like one another, but love one another. That is the world that is coming into being right now. And I am so grateful for your holy yes. I am so grateful for your holy being, because we need you. And I know that each of us is unfolding in this invitation right now, making a way forward from that inner knowing, beautifully, gracefully, spaciously, with all the rest we've ever needed. And let it be. And together let's anchor this in prayer. And so it is.